Less than a week later, and again at recreation, one of the sisters remarked brightly, "Oh, I dreamed of Madame Celeste Divine last night." There was a whoop of laughter. No one had mentioned her since Miss Sullivan's account of her visit to her salon. Sister Camilla tinkled her little bell, which signified an announcement. "Can it be that the divine Celeste walks again?" she asked with a smile at Miss Sullivan. She pulled a telegram from her pocket. "Just listen to this." She read, "Arriving tomorrow morning, February 18th, T&P Railroad. Father James J. Sullivan, C.M." Madeline, excuse me. Madeline clapped her hands excitedly. "Maybe he'll propose a long journey," she said laughingly. "Over the rainbow," added another sister. Still another said, "St. Louis may be over the rainbow, but you're not here quite 6 weeks yet, honey. You have 7 weeks more to go." While yet another predicted sotto voce, and back to Texarkana if you intend visiting any more fortune tellers. Madeline took their teasing in good part, and impersonating the stentorian tones of Madame Celeste, said, "We shall see what we shall see." What they saw was this. Madeline slipped into the dining room where Father Sullivan was having breakfast. She told him of her foolish visit to Madame Celeste, adding, "I did it just for fun, Father, on the spur of the moment. I really knew better." Madeline noted the fleeting look of unease that clouded Father Sullivan's face, but all he said was, "I shouldn't have done that, my child. However, people who never make mistakes never really learn to live." There was a brief silence, Madeline's blue eyes eloquently contrite. Then Father Sullivan chuckled. "Don't be worried. How would you like me to tell your fortune?" Madeline smiled as though a great stone had been lifted from her heart. "Well," said Father Sullivan, an impish twinkle in his eye, "I propose you take a long journey." Madeline held her breath. "Tomorrow is George Washington's birthday. My business is concluded here. If you can be ready by tomorrow for the noon T&P, you'll be in time for the seminary entrance retreat, which opens the morning of February 23rd and lasts for 3 days. When you come out of that retreat, you will be a member of the community, and for the duration of your seminary, you will be called Sister Sullivan." "But, Father, I have been postulating only 6 weeks. Do you think I'm ready?" Father Sullivan chuckled again. "Don't you think you did a little postulating at Waco? Maybe this will make up for that year of abstention from reading. What do you think?" "Well," Madeline replied, "the thought is not very original, but I think God is simply wonderful." The travelers arrived early in St. Louis, and Miss Sullivan was just in time for her entrance 3-day retreat. The province was newly divided into an eastern province with headquarters at Emmitsburg and a western province with temporary headquarters located on the top floor of St. Vincent's Institution, a hospital for the mentally ill, while awaiting the construction of a new provincial house in Normandy, a suburb of St. Louis. In order to organize a seminary novitiate as soon as possible, Emmitsburg loaned for 1 year Sister Augustine Park, the longtime directress of their seminary. Sister Augustine was one of the great women in the annals of the community. With her, she brought 3 seminary sisters who had spent some time under her guidance and would know how to help the newcomers to adjust to the strange new world within a world that was the seminary in 1909. The seminary sisters from the East were originally from states within the new Western province, so they were happy to be nearer home. Making the retreat with Sister Sullivan were Sister Zoe Donnelly and Sister Elizabeth Lewis. They became sisters on February 26th, and throughout their entire community life kept in touch. Sister Sullivan took to the seminary as the thirsty stag to a mountain stream. She reveled in the atmosphere of silence and solitude. She was the life of recreation, with her fund of amusing anecdotes, her willingness to recite the more dramatic poetry of the repertoire that she learned in her elocution lessons with Sister Loretto, Daughter of the Cross. Reminiscent of Madeline, as we saw her in her Shreveport days, is her seminary record. Margaret Sullivan, almost 23 years of age, born in Texarkana, Texas, healthy, good, very kind to her companions, obedient, unaffected, very generous in the practice of humility. Knows little of domestic duties, but most willing to learn. A great talker, excellent in English, a graduate nurse, untidy. Madeline, with her companions, received the holy habit on November 26, 1909, and was given the name Sister Catherine. A few days later, she left for her first assignment, St. Thomas Hospital, Nashville, Tennessee. She was greeted with great warmth by the sisters and felt a sense of belonging, due in great part to Sister Scholastica Cahoe, her first sister servant. It is an amusing fact that Sister Catherine could have spent a year in the hands of Sister Augustine Park, a perfect lady. The word perfect lady implies, in this context, along with other such traits as gentleness, soft-spokenness, an unaffected but marked fastidiousness, both as regards manner of speech and grooming, and was now to spend another year with another perfect lady in the sense described, and still be evaluated by both as untidy. The probable cause lay in the fact that Sister Catherine was so attractive, so outgoing, so lovable, that each superior thought she ought to be allowed at least one fault among the many solid virtues that were so manifest in her strong character. Sister Catherine was in no hurry to correct her untidiness, believing that too careful grooming was the mark of a small mind. But she was to correct that fault one day in the future, in a way that gives striking insights into how Sister Catherine became a self-made saint. Meantime, she remained untidy until God's good time. Sister Catherine was happy and contented in her work at St. Thomas Hospital, although she could never bring herself to anything more than a very supernatural liking for nursing itself. She loved people, however, patients, colleagues, the hospital personnel, and she was very happy in her work. As supervisor of a hall, one of her responsibilities was to teach the students to keep clear, concise, and correct charts, so that doctors and relief nurses would better understand the patient's needs. Sister Catherine went over these charts herself and was tact itself in pointing out where the young students could use a more explicit phrase or a more apt word to describe a patient's condition. To her great amusement one morning, she found a young nurse had recorded of her special patient, "Kidneys moved." Sister Catherine wrote in red ink, "Where to?" The nurses loved Sister Catherine because she was essentially lovable, kind, and understanding. Several of them kept up a lifelong correspondence with her. One can imagine their grief one morning when assembled at the nurses' station to give and hear reports from night and early morning shifts. Sister Catherine told her girls that Sister Scholastica had just received a telegram to send Sister Catherine to St. Louis, and that she would be replaced by another sister in a short time. Although the girls, many of them graduate nurses who had served at St. Thomas Hospital for more than a decade, wept, Sister Catherine smiled and remarked, "Life is ahead of you, girls. Learn to live it a day at a time. Otherwise, life gets to be a bit of a much too much sort of thing, and we lose perspective." She had occasion to recall these words in the nearby future, words which are more easily preached than practiced by frail human nature. Fortified with 2 years of mission experience, Sister Catherine returned to St. Louis to find herself assigned to the office of third directress of the seminary. After 1 year spent in organizing and forming the seminary sisters of the Western Province, Sister Augustine Park returned to Emmitsburg and resumed her duties as directress of the seminary there. Sister Augustine was replaced by Sister Baptista Lynch. Sister Augustine Park was born to be a seminary directress. She was a model daughter of charity, kind but firm, an inspiring leader, one who formed soldiers as well as sisters, who, in her opinion, through sustained effort, could well become saints. She sought to insert steel into the backbone of each seminary sister, and the transformations she achieved with God's grace placed the newly formed Western Province forever in her debt. Sister Catherine had admired and loved her dearly as her directress and clung tenaciously to the ideals and principles she had so forcefully inculcated. The second directress, Sister Madeline Morris, was a sister from Emmitsburg who had been sent to be the strong right arm of Sister Baptista, and at the same time an understudy to replace her as first directress within a year or two. Sister Madeline, another perfect lady, held the same ideals and principles as Sister Augustine Park, and the same ideas about the how of formation of a religious character and personality. It was her contention that just as the sacrament of baptism conferred sanctifying grace on these candidates for the religious life, so the sacrament of confirmation made them potential soldiers of Jesus Christ and potential heirs of the kingdom of heaven. Sister Madeline contended that soldiers needed self-control, discipline, courage, and strength of character. She believed that these goals could not be nourished by the milk of human kindness alone, nor would these goals be achieved by unlimited permissiveness. She was consequently impatient with what she called the grandmotherliness of Sister Baptista, not stopping to think that to be overindulgent was basic to Sister Baptista's character, which could not be changed at her age. Nor, to be fair, had Sister Baptista asked for this assignment, which was really made to order for Sister Madeline, but not for Sister Baptista herself. Sister Catherine grew to love Sister Madeline deeply. She matched Sister Catherine in wit, intellect, and love of fun, and out of this year together bloomed a lifetime friendship. Sister Catherine was of the same mind about character formation as were Sister Augustine and Sister Madeline, but she made desperate efforts to modify the method of attaining these ideals for the sake of peace. Sister Madeline could not or would not compromise. Sister Catherine was capable of bearing many burdens, but disharmony was not one of them. With her shrewd insight, she knew that disharmony is, by its nature, disruptive, and no matter how prudently one tries to hide its existence, young eyes see more clearly and are far less mellow in their judgments of human nature than are the more experienced. It was part of Sister Catherine's lifestyle never to speak and never to listen to uncharitable remarks about others. In the presence of fault-finding or any kind of unconstructive criticism, her silence was like a lowering, two-edged sword. Caught as she was in this conflict of personalities, she wore herself out praying and doing penance, consoled by one happy factor: the evening recreation was always hilarious and healing. For Sister Madeline, with an active ally in Sister Catherine, could so vary each night's period of relaxation that all participated, and in sharing themselves under the unobtrusive leadership of Sister Madeline, laughter made it possible for the day's frictions, frustrations, and conflicts to disappear. but they reared their ugly heads at dawn and persisted through the day. A permission granted out of an overindulgent kindness by the first directress, the same permission greatly modified or even canceled by the second directress. Redress of wrongs sought from the third directress because she was young and more understanding, while the third directress, loving Sister Madeline as she did, had still to uphold Sister Baptista as the properly constituted authority in this case. She therefore always advised obedience to her directives and defended her granted permissions. Thus Sister Catherine was in a bind, caught up in petty crises, which, as we all know, are to be found in all walks of life, but still wear one down to the breaking point. She did not yet have, at 26 years of age, the wisdom that can come only from first-hand experience and which, in middle age, she was to have in such abundance. She had romped through life a free, blithe spirit. Now she had to learn the meaning of our Lord's words, that one can imitate him only if she takes up her cross daily and willingly. Sister Catherine was willing enough, but she had not as yet learned to accept the fact that even holy people, what with the complications and contradictions of tainted human nature, can bewilder our hearts and shake our faith when they seem to ignore the demands of charity. Only in the next world would perfection be achieved and sustained, but this was the here and now, and Sister Catherine had to deal with it, and she was nearer to the breaking point than anyone guessed. It was just when the darkest hour seemed to promise a bright dawn that Sister Catherine received word that her dearly beloved father had been killed in a car accident. Now this was something Sister could readily accept. It involved no clash of personalities. It was simply something she could calmly accept as the will of God. Something that, in perfect peace and resignation, she could discuss in the chapel with him, heart to heart. The next morning at breakfast, Sister Catherine sat white and listless at the table. The Sister Infirmarian's professional, knowing eye recognized the signs and reached Sister Catherine just in time to prevent her from falling to the floor. All the sisters of this large mission had heard the announcement in the chapel that the Mass would be offered for the repose of the soul of Mr. Janice Sullivan, father of Sister Catherine. Naturally, everyone, including the province superiors, thought the fainting spell was due to shock at her father's sudden and violent death, and great was the sympathy of each sister in the house. But the practiced eye of Sister Rose Bohm, the infirmarian, knew there was something deeper, and after a few days in the seminary infirmary, insisted that Sister Catherine be removed to the larger and better equipped infirmary of the sisters on mission in the hospital, in another part of the house. Sister Eugenia Feely, first visitatrix, provincial superior, visited Sister Catherine each day, her penetrating eye searching for improvement. Sister Catherine parried all questions concerning the cause of her illness with, "I am not really sick, but very tired." Sister Eugenia was shrewd, intuitive, and sharply perceptive. It would not be too much to hazard a theory that she guessed, at least partially, the cause of Sister Catherine's illness. It was Sister Eugenia's suggestion that Sister Catherine be transferred completely away from the temporary provincial house to St. Joseph Hospital, Alton, Illinois, a half-hour's trip from St. Louis. The sisters at Alton lovingly welcomed Sister Catherine, now well enough to be up most of the day. But the sisters, always facing a nurse shortage, were very busy all day long, so that Sister Catherine was left pretty much alone in the community room, reading, of all things, the lives of our deceased sisters. In a way, it sounds rather a morbid therapy, since the lives insinuated that these departed sisters had somehow attained to sanctity in their infancy, and few of us can identify with that phenomenon. Since Sister Catherine retired immediately after supper, she had no recreational contact with the sisters. But here a very revealing trait, rather predominant among the daughters of charity towards their sick companions, manifests itself. Of course, no sister is permitted to leave sick patients, except for the briefest time, when another sister can replace her for the time being. But the administrator's schedule is subject to change without inconveniencing others. So busy though she was, the sister servant, in this case, Sister Zoe Sheeswell, would just happen to have a half hour or so free every morning about 10 o'clock, and again in the afternoon, just after 3 o'clock, and would slip into the community room and say, "Sister Catherine, I don't have a thing on my mind right this minute except you. Why don't we play 3 games of checkers and see if I can beat you 2 out of 3? Sister Catherine loved this half hour, which stretched to an hour on days when Sister Zoe thought she looked unusually wan. They both played a good and very close game. Sister Catherine had had long years of practice playing chess with her father back in the cozy days of Texarkana, so she won more often than not, but only after Sister Zoe had put forth strenuous effort in order to give challenge to her eager partner. Sister Zoe was a beautiful woman with flashing brown eyes and cherry red cheeks. She was generally throughout the community considered strict, whatever that meant in those days, but her kind of therapy for Sister Catherine revealed a loving heart. Though she has been dead for many, many years, I still blow her an occasional kiss, destination heaven, for the tender, loving care she gave to Sister Catherine. But Sister Catherine's health did not improve. Sister Eugenia Feely, immersed in the time-consuming affairs of the evolving Western province, which at that time stretched from Iowa to the state of Washington and from Lake Michigan to the Gulf of Mexico, still made time for visits with Sister Catherine to note her progress and to bring her news of the seminary. Among the younger sisters of the province, Sister Eugenia was rated as capable of looking into your soul. She can read every thought while you're thinking it, they were fond of saying, with a slight shiver. If Sister Eugenia could look into Sister Catherine's mind and read any of her thoughts, she gave no sign. But on a certain day, late in 1911, Sister Eugenia did give her the stunning news that Sister Madeline was given a year's leave of absence to go to Paris to study under the famous Sœur Chesenlong, directress of the seminary, where candidates from many countries made their novitiate under her guidance. She is still spoken of reverently and considered in the annals of the community a great directress, judged mainly and rightly on the type of sister she produced after 1 year's guidance. Sister Catherine smiled brightly at this piece of news. Now her beloved Sister Madeline would be under the tutelage of a kindred mind and a brilliant example of what a seminary directress, for those long-gone distant times, should be. But the greatest news Sister Eugenia brought on a fall day of 1912 was for Sister Catherine herself. "I am not satisfied with the progress you are making here," Sister Eugenia told her very kindly. "There's no place to walk or sit in the sun. I think if you go to St. Mary's Hospital in Milwaukee for a few months, you will get more exercise walking along the shore of beautiful Lake Michigan. In that bracing climate, you're bound to develop a bigger appetite and sleep better." Sister Catherine was deeply grateful for Sister Eugenia's kindness and said so. In a few days, she traveled to St. Mary's in Milwaukee, with an invalid sister who was to spend the rest of her life there. Even 60 years ago, in buildings long since replaced and added to again, St. Mary's Hospital, Milwaukee, was a thing of beauty which boasted, "Every room looks out upon the lake," and in summer the lake was as blue as the Mediterranean. But the rooms in the sisters' quarters had no view of the lake and were located on the 4th floor, far, far from where the action was. Sister Catherine and her companion, Sister Frances McKinney, were welcomed with that same warm cordiality that St. Vincent insisted upon and made a matter of rule way back in 1633. While autumn lasted and when the weather was briskly cool, Sister Catherine took long, long walks on the sandy, rock-bound shore that stretched as far as one could see. Sometimes she just sat on one of the small boulders that dotted the shore. But the appetite did not get bigger, nor did Sister Catherine's health get any better. One boon, however, was the companionship of Sister Frances McKinney, who, confined to a wheelchair, sewed, embroidered, and turned out exquisite needlework. Sister Catherine, in spite of her daily handiwork in sewing torn dresses and incorrigible hems back in school at Shreveport, was always clumsy with a needle, but she was good company for Sister Frances. With true sisterly kindness, the sister servant arranged each day that Sister Catherine would eat a very early supper, anticipate her night prayers, and go to bed at 5 o'clock. "It will be so nice and quiet," Sister Dolores Gillespie told her, "so you will have a good long night's sleep and be fresh as a daisy by 5 in the morning," which was an extra hour, since the sisters at that time in history rose at 4 o'clock. Sister Frances' room was on the 1st floor, so there was no one to talk to, no one within call. This was when Sister Catherine's too lively imagination took over. Speaking of this period years later to a close and trusted friend, who at the time was going through a painful illness, Sister Catherine recalled her own experience. "Oh, those dreadful twilights of early to bed at dusk. Sister, I would crawl into bed and lie there in stark terror. I couldn't put my finger on a thing that I was afraid of, but I would lie there frozen with a nameless dread. To this day I recall those nights, those very dark nights of the soul, when I could only cry with David, 'Heal me, O Lord, for my body is in terror. My soul, too, is utterly terrified.'" So you see, sister, she would add, it is a universal experience that goes back to the beginning of man. Nurses always watch for apprehensiveness in their patients. They know it is worse than sickness itself. "But why didn't you tell somebody?" her friend asked. "Pride," she answered promptly. "I was ashamed of being such a coward, especially since everyone was so kind to me. It was a great concession on the part of Sister Dolores to send me so early to bed. She honestly thought that if you could stand up, being with the community was better than any kind of medicine." "You said that terror came from your pride," her friend probed. "Didn't it go deeper than that?" Sister Catherine paused. "Frankly, yes, sister. My imagination used to run wild with a very concrete fear, which was partly responsible for my not getting well in Alton. You see, I had read everything I could lay my hands on about the requirements of the religious life, and over again, in various pamphlets, 3 signs were given to identify a vocation. Number 1, good health. Number 2, average intelligence. Number 3, acceptance by a religious congregation. In the pamphlets I read, good health was always placed first. The implication was that if your health failed, especially before you made your holy vows, that was a sign from God that you did not belong in the religious life and would be sent home. With the freedom that can exist only between friends who have weathered storms together, she related the situation, which has been described in previous pages, and went on to say, "I know my nerves were shattered then, but I do think I would have recovered in a reasonable time if I had not been convinced that I was in great danger of being sent home because of ill health." Since her friend had experienced the same fear for the first 10 years of her community life, she knew exactly how Sister Catherine had felt. It is a ridiculous idea, not an iota of common sense to support the fear, since the community has never sent a sister home solely because her health fails. Sister Catherine knew this well. She had been on duty in the seminary and had seen for herself that the community uses the criterion of good health as a prerequisite for entrance, not for perseverance. If they accept a candidate who is not strong, they accept her for life. Analyzing the heartbreaking terror and the unreasonable fears, one cannot escape the temptation to believe that at least a small remnant of little Maudie Summerfield's overactive imagination was fighting for its life. But in this case, unlike Maudie, weeping over her own death and detailed burial, there were no healing tears to act as a catharsis for her terror and fears. But a beautiful and enlightening rainbow was just around the corner. I'm ready. Chapter 4. It was in August of 1912 that Sister Catherine received a letter, a special one, from Sister Eugenia, telling her again that she was concerned as to what would be the next step to bring about Sister Catherine's restoration to complete health. "You have a fine constitution, really," Sister Eugenia wrote, "and I know that in God's own time He will make you perfectly well, so do not be discouraged at this test of your love of God." Sister Catherine's heart soared as those words allayed her fears, but there was more to come. "Just as an experiment, dear sister," wrote Sister Eugenia, "I would very much like you to go over to St. Rose's home for a few hours each day to teach the 7th and 8th grades. I know it will be new to you at first to teach 30 children, but I also know you have a good head and a tender heart, two essential qualities for teachers." In this same mail, I am notifying Sister Dolores. Please let me know how you feel about this assignment. Sister Catherine wrote that she would be delighted, as she would have written if the letter were sending her to darkest Africa. But with Wordsworth, her heart really did leap up as though she were beholding a host of daffodils. But this was something much more substantial than daffodils or all the flowers of the world. The perceptive reader will see that at last a root cause of Sister Catherine's long illness was coming to light. St. Rose's Home for Girls was a large red brick building whose location depended upon which door you used in leaving St. Mary's Hospital. Seen from the front door, it was adjacent to the hospital, with a narrow side street between. Viewed from the side door, it was directly across the street, meaning this same little side street. Like the hospital, it faced lovely Lake Michigan, with easy access to the shore, where the children and sisters of St. Rose's often in summer ate their evening meal and on holidays had picnics. The children loved to wade in the lake and delighted in bucking the sometime high waves. At first, Sister Catherine continued to live at the hospital and go to school across the street each morning. But early in 1913, she received word from St. Louis that she was missioned to St. Rose's as a full-time teacher, which gave her a real sense of belonging. She had at long last joined the ranks of the fully employed. Sister Catherine was ecstatically happy at St. Rose's. Sister Jerome Bress, the sister servant, was a large, plump, good-natured person. Most of the sisters were, like Sister Catherine, still in their 20s, and although the children were not easy to handle, Sister Catherine remembered that Madeline Sullivan had been in that category at school too. She easily won their respect first and then their love because of her understanding and strong sense of humor. But the climax of joy for Sister Catherine was that she was now in a position where her duty did not only permit, but required reading in every academic field. Real reading, beyond the necrologies of sainted sisters who seemed never to have had any conflicts or difficulties on the road to sanctity, since they had been born to holiness and manifested it in their cradles. There were outside readings assigned in the biographies of great historical figures, shades of Sister Gabriel and Napoleon. There were poets and their poetry, and essays by the critics, favorable or unfavorable to their works. There were assignments in geography with supplementary readings in the National Geographic. There were anthologies of literature, and finally, her 11 and 12-year-old pupils were reading David Copperfield, Great Expectations, Sam Weller's Valentine, and stories from the Old Testament. All the children of the 4 upper grades joined Sister Catherine's reading club. One day, Sister Jerome called Sister Catherine into her office. "Sister," she said after seating her comfortably in a chair close to her own, "I want to thank you for the interest in books you have aroused in all the students of the house, as well as your own class, and leading them to realize how important education is to their future lives when they will have to earn their own living. You are a born teacher, and you have infected everybody with your enthusiasm. But this new interest in their classwork has played havoc with their house duties. The girls who have the responsibility of keeping the parlor swept and well dusted are now pulling the shades down to hide the dust and dirt, and are crouching behind the sofa and chairs, reading. I admit that their interest in books has greatly improved their conduct, both in and out of the classroom, but these children are not going to grow into ladies of leisure with time to read for hours and hours every day. Are we perhaps spoiling them for the more practical things in life?" Sister Catherine was alarmed. The girls were so happy with their newfound joy in the world of books. Their behavior had so improved that life was easier for all of the other teachers. The girls, too, were getting vicarious experiences that would mature them, make them cultured women, build wide vocabularies which they could gain in no other way. She put all this into words for Sister Jerome, whose own taste in reading ran largely to Christian Perfection, True Devotion to Mary, and the Conferences and Letters of St. Vincent de Paul. They came to a happy compromise. Sister Catherine knew absolutely nothing about housework, but pledged that the girls would finish their domestic duties first, take at least a half hour of exercise in the open air, and then only could they read. It was an eloquent appeal. Sister Catherine left Sister Jerome's office with a $50 bill to be used for selecting new books for the library. Sister Catherine steadily improved in health. She used to say of St. Rose's, it was a little bit of heaven. There was perfect harmony among the sisters. We were all pretty much the same age, and we had loads of fun. Evening recreation, in schools there is no time for a midday recreation period, was uproarious, and I think Sister Jerome enjoyed it as much or even more than those of us who made veritable fools of ourselves, all for the honor and glory of God. Sister Catherine kept in touch with the companions of that day, even when they were scattered over the province on different missions. The influence Sister Catherine exercised over the girls at St. Rose's was phenomenal. Many of them corresponded with her for years, and a few up to the very end of Sister's life. Some of their letters she kept in her files. There is one very touching letter from a young woman of 30. It reads in part, "You are always very near me, Sister, and it is certainly a red-letter day when I receive a letter from you. Even though you know I have not been and am not even now a good person. The knowledge of your faithful friendship often keeps me from going further down the drain. But I want to confide something very special to your heart, trusting you to understand that I am trying to go straight now. It was just 10 nights ago. I was in deep trouble. You can guess what. I was so depressed at the complete betrayal of someone I had loved and trusted, and honestly believed that he loved me too. I simply could not stand my own company a minute longer. Though I was in bed and it was nearly midnight, I got up and dressed and went for a walk. Don't faint. I am, more's the pity, used to being on the street at midnight. You know my background, sister, so what can you expect? I remember when I'd say that to you, you would say so confidently, just hold fast to your faith in God. Remember, you are captain of your own soul. Sister, I'm afraid you just don't know how hard it is to be good in the kind of world I live in. Well, anyhow, I walked and I headed straight for the river. The sides of the bridge are rather low, and I sat on the top rail for 15 minutes thinking. I could see no way out of my problem, so I got ready to jump. I thought to myself, God has forgotten me. He really doesn't even remember me. It is so long since I deserted him. Sister, I actually put one foot over the railing. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared to die. I was in hell right now. Surely the other one couldn't be any worse than this. And I wasn't afraid of the dark waters below. So I was just about to put the other foot over without any fear in my heart. But suddenly your face appeared before me. I could see it as plainly as when I sat in the front desk in your classroom. And let me say it, please, adored you. You seemed to be saying to me, "Oh, Claire, can you do this to our Lord?" I said angrily, "Yes, I can," stubborn like always. Then I looked into your eyes. Has anyone ever told you how blue they are? And then bursting into tears, I said to you, "But I can't do it to you. You were the one who taught me to love to read and saved me from hours of loneliness. And sister, we all loved you because you never used to lecture us or preach at us." I climbed back over the railing of the bridge and went home. The next morning I wrote to the mayor and told him the rails of this bridge were too low, a danger, especially to children. The writer was with Sister Catherine when she received and read this letter. What did Sister Catherine do? Well, she wept briefly, then set the wheels in motion to get this young woman a good social worker in New York, a sister in whom Sister Catherine had great confidence and knew she would see Claire through her trouble. An interesting sidelight on this letter is that Sister Catherine had taught composition to Claire for 2 years, encouraging her to try to become a writer. It didn't work out that way, but what a talent for writing. Pages could be filled with excerpts of letters from former girls of St. Rose's, but space is too limited. However, for those who might wonder how Claire turned out at last, there is a very interesting angle. She had a child, and Sister Catherine encouraged her to give it up for adoption in a wonderful Catholic home. Then Sister persuaded Claire to choose a spiritual director from among the names of 3 priests located in New York, who were personal friends over a period of years. The one Claire chose because she liked his name was a pastor in downstate New York who gave her a job as his secretary. One day, Father saw an ad in the morning newspaper asking for a fairly young woman to act as companion for an elderly but very alert lady. Father suggested that Claire apply. She was shocked. With my background, Father, who would give me a reference? Father replied gallantly, "I will. You've worked for me 3 years now. Let bygones be bygones. Hasn't our Lord said, 'Though your sins be as scarlet, amen, I say to you, I shall not remember them'?" The stunning climax is that at Father's suggestion, Claire visited the woman in person after first writing a letter. She found her future employer a very wealthy old woman, but rather brusque at first meeting. At the end of a 2-hour session during which they spoke of many things, omitting cabbages and sealing wax, but including kings, the dear old lady's eyes smiled softly at Claire as she said, "Out of 7 applicants, I choose you. Not only because of Father Lyon's wonderful recommendation, which is fine, but I'd expect a woman of 35 to settle down with all her foolishness behind her. No, I chose you mainly because your own letter to me was so well written, and my dear, you know how to carry on a good conversation, and you are well read. I foresee some very good times ahead, exchanging views on books." Sister Catherine was overjoyed with this news from Claire. She said to the writer, "I do believe all my guilt feelings about reading have been exorcised. I wish that I could show this letter to Sister Jerome, God rest her soul." "Why not send it to Sister Gabriel Murtaugh?" her companion suggestion. To this wicked suggestion, there was no response. On March 15, 1914, Sister Catherine made her first holy vows. She was radiantly happy. Her health was much improved, and all her fears of being sent home had vanished. She felt all daughter of charity now. Her vocation was dearer to her than her life itself. She could now be happy that she, by the grace of God, had come through that rough period of fear and terror without once thinking of taking back what had so wholeheartedly been given to God. And now today, March 15, 1914, she made a complete oblation of herself to our Lord, and she felt a deep sense of peace and security. Speaking of this time much later, Sister Catherine said to a friend, "My holy vows released me forever from those silly, groundless fears that I would be sent home. But you know, the devil is very tricky, very subtle. He even made me feel that I ought to go home of my own accord, since I was sick so long and doing nothing for the community. And I recall my sister Elizabeth, like Job's friends, visiting me at the time, urging me to come home. She would say, 'You can see that this is really a time when God is speaking to you, showing you that this is not your vocation. If it were, you would not have broken down with an illness that has no name.' She meant this advice in all kindness and was shocked when I said, 'Elizabeth, be still. Help me to implore God to keep me, not to let me be sent home.' Elizabeth was amazed to hear me talk like this. One is always such a pearl of great price to one's own family. She thought the whole community should be on its collective knees, thanking God for having sent this gem to adorn the order. 'But I am grateful to God,' she repeated, 'for those hard times, and I am thankful to Sister Augustine Park for working at least a little iron into my backbone. It helped to bring me through, though hardly with flying colors.' There was no cloud in her sky to warn her of rougher days ahead. Saints are not turned out in assembly lines, but cooperation with Providence in whatever He sends to try one's soul or to purify it from its faults strengthens us to do what we came to do, follow Christ, and to carry our cross as we follow the hard road He trod." Another 2 years flew by at St. Rose's. Sister Catherine had no idea that 1916 was to be a strangely momentous year for her. But lightning did not strike for 5 years. While Sister Catherine was enthusiastically carrying on her teaching duties, loving her work more and more as the days went by, the local mailman, making his daily rounds, brought sorrow to this one today and joy to her tomorrow. One special letter arrived one bright morning for Sister Jerome, the sister servant at St. Rose's. In her kindness, she stopped by Sister Catherine's classroom, where she was preparing assignments for the day. Sister Jerome read her a paragraph of the letter, which was from the provincial house in St. Louis. It said in part, "I am happy to tell you that among the sisters privileged to make the annual retreat at the provincial house in this year of 1916 is Sister Catherine Sullivan. Please have her arrive in St. Louis a few days ahead of time so she can rest and relax a little before enjoying her retreat." Sister Catherine's cup of joy was overflowing. Every sister in the province waited eagerly for her turn to make a retreat at the provincial house, which came about every 3 or 4 years. In due time she arrived in St. Louis, 2 days ahead of time, which she spent visiting with sisters from the other missions, and above all, her beloved Sister Madeline, with whom she walked over the beautiful grounds for the 2 free evenings she had. It is customary when making a retreat at the provincial house to have a half-hour interview with the visitatrix, Sister Eugenia Feely, who was remarkable for getting thoroughly well acquainted with the sisters of her province. Sister Catherine's turn for a visit happened to come the morning before retreat closed. Sister Eugenia was genuinely pleased with the progress Sister Catherine had made and the really miraculous success she had achieved in teaching. Sister Catherine used to recall this conversation when the topic turned to the subject of teaching versus nursing. "This is what Sister Eugenia said to me," and she was not given to paying compliments. At long last, dear Sister Catherine, you have truly found yourself. I know it must have been a great sacrifice for you to give up nursing, but look what a teacher you are. I am sure that St. Rose's is just the place for you now, and future assignments should be in the teaching field. You are a born teacher, and you must never forget to thank God for the talents He has given you." Sister Catherine reeled out of the room, overcome with the compliments and the assurance that God makes His will known through her superiors. This conversation took place about 9 o'clock in the morning. At 10:30 the next morning, after mail delivery, the sisters heard the special bell that was rung when the council was to meet. In those days, when the bell rang, each sister knelt for a short time to beg the Holy Spirit to direct the decisions the council would be called upon to make for the well-being of the province. Recalling this particular day, which Sister Catherine did frequently, she used to remark, "That day, instead of praying for the decisions to be made, I thanked God for the one that had been made about my future as a teacher." At 1:30, Sister Catherine was summoned to Sister Eugenia, who was sitting at the head of the council table. Sister Catherine sensed that something was wrong, very wrong, as she seated herself at the right side of Sister Eugenia at the table. "Sister," began Sister Eugenia, "I never like to reverse a decision once it has been made. That is why I usually wait until the last moment to tell a sister that she is missioned." There was a slight tremor in her voice as she continued. "This morning's mail brought news of an emergency at the leprosarium at Carville. Dear sister, I meant every word I said yesterday morning, but now I have to tell you that your services as a nurse are desperately needed. And the worst of it is you will have to leave at 3 o'clock today. You will have a companion." Sister Catherine knew that Sister Eugenia felt as disappointed as she herself did. Sister Catherine smiled as though she had been the recipient of good news. "We can always count on Sister Augustine Park's soldiers," Sister Eugenia said with a twinkle in her eye. She embraced Sister Catherine warmly as she bade her goodbye. Chapter 5. Sister Catherine Sullivan arrived in Carville early in 1916, the 16th sister to be assigned to this work. One can judge of the primitive state of the colony, since a sister there observed with pride, The patients numbered 103 at this time, and the same year marked the installation of electric lights to replace candles and kerosene lamps. Plans were being made to purchase a cinematograph for the entertainment of the patients. The community at this period was in the throes of changing the leper colony into a state hospital and finally to the federal institution it is today. But there were difficulties in securing just the right place. Louisiana was not happy to cede land for what most of its people considered a dread purpose. To look back a moment, the First World War impeded progress, but finally the federally owned and operated hospital was officially opened on February 1st, 1921, with Dr. Oswald E. Denny as its first medical officer in charge. Present at the hoisting of Old Glory were Sister Edith, Sister Servant, Sister de Chantal, Sister Catherine Sullivan, Father Keenan, Dr. and Mrs. Oswald Denny. Sister Catherine had a way of remarking, at odd times, that once each year one passed the date that sometime in the future would be called the day God sounded the call for the beginning of eternity. But February 1st, 1921, gave no hint of that last day, February 1st, 1969. We were still to have our dear sister for 49 years. The sisters who served as the nursing staff and Dr. Denny were remarkably interested in improving physical facilities. Hand in hand with the medical and nursing staff's great progress in understanding Hansen's disease and its scientific care, beautiful functional buildings sprang up in a veritable southern plantation setting, live oaks with heavy masses of Spanish moss adding to their beauty. Each patient who wished it could have a plot of ground for gardening, and finally, resort cottages were built where patients could enjoy vacations. Sister Catherine had one special project to which she gave every moment she could spare from her nursing duties, and that was the building of a beautiful chapel for the Catholic patients, who at the present time had to crowd into an old relic of a slave cabin for services, while the Protestants had a very well-built brick church, erected by the generous members of the varying denominations. Sister Catherine felt that nowhere could the Catholic patients find more solace and comfort than in the solitude and silence of their very own chapel, where they could speak to God of their sorrows and needs. With characteristic physical vigor and spiritual zeal, she set about doing the things that she could do, using the rare gifts that God had given her to reach out into the hearts of those who would be touched with the plight of the human condition and needs of the patients at Carville. She gave talks to local and farther away organizations in New Orleans, even as far away as Chicago and California. She presented to her audiences the true picture of Hansen's disease, so called after Dr. Hansen was the first to isolate the bacilli that caused leprosy, showing how the patients were suffering from a 6,000-year-old prejudice nourished by old wives' tales, of how the patients were in a state of contagious decay, whereas in the vast number of cases, patients lived many years without any blemish that could be detected except by the most perceptive of doctors. She spoke of the need for a chapel. She wrote articles and appeared before many audiences who found her logical presentation of Hansen's disease irresistible. The following article, which Sister Catherine cut down to leaflet size, alone brought in more than $10,000 toward the building of the chapel. That was considered a large sum in the 1920s. The Longest Mile in the World by Sister Catherine. Abby Dibnett quotes a little boy, out of the mouths of babes, as saying gravely to his elders, "You look at what I am looking at, but you do not see what I see." So many a chance visitor to the National Home for Lepers at Carver, Louisiana, sees only its vast expanse of well-kept lawns and well-built homes.